Why will it move?
So let me open this up. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special called meeting of the Temple City Council. It is May 23rd, just a little bit after 2 p.m. And before we dive in, I'd like to address the council and some of the folks in the room. We had an executive session with Adrian on Thursday, and Adrian was asked to be prepared to present some certain information regarding some economic development projects. And I allowed that conversation to go further than it should have. And the conversation needed to take place, but I don't think I don't think Thursday's meeting was the right format and maybe the right folks in the room. And that was absolutely a mistake on my part. In fact, at one point, Ms. Myers leaned over and said, maybe today's not the day. And I let it be the day. So my apologies to everyone. I've had a couple of conversations with Adrian since then. Frankly, I told him, I said, I hope that you and I can get back where we were before that meeting. So he has graciously extended a lot of grace to me that I should have given him on Thursday and didn't. So I want to apologize to this group and to the extended group. Adrian and I, like I said, we've had conversations. He was supposed to be here today, and we had a good conversation this morning. He had something come up, and I told him I just wanted to go ahead and make that apology publicly, and as soon as I could. So I apologize to everyone for letting that one get away from me. And you know, we all know what TEDC does here. We know the importance of their role here. And I didn't do anything to help that on Thursday. So again, my apologies to everyone in the room. Adrian's been very nice about accepting my apology. And like I said, my hope is that we can just move forward. So my mistake. I'm truly sorry for that. We'll do better next time. This is the second or third time I've had to apologize for something I said as mayor. I think I'd get better than that, but I'm working on it. So my apologies. Okay, let's go ahead and move forward to item number 1, which is to review and discuss the tax increment financing reinvestment zone number 1 financing project plans in the city of Temple, Texas reinvestment zone number 1 tax increment revenue bonds series 2022A and the taxable series 2022B and the city of Temple, Texas combination tax and revenue certificates of obligation series 2022. So I'm sure not the expert on this. So, I mean, everyone knows what happened last week regarding Panda 2. And so we need to make some adjustments to a proposed bond issuance. So Tracy, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Today I wanted to go over, and I can reinvestment zone folks see. I need to stand up, get on the other side. You good? As we all know, we had slated to issue reinvestment zone series 2022 TERS increment revenue bonds. The total amount was $85.7 million, and that included $80 million of project funds and $5.7 million for a reserve fund. And this was the project list. Our timeline for that was May 6th, we received a bond rating. May 16th was scheduled for the due diligence call. May 19th, scheduled for City Council to consider an ordinance delegating authority to issue the debt. And then we had all of the offering documents ready to go, and we're going to price next week, week of May 23rd, and then actual closing would be June 9th. But and just going on to our rating request for the Series A tax exempt, Series B taxable. We received that rating. Our rating was they affirmed the Baa2 on the existing outstanding debt, and then issued a Baa2 stable on the proposed debt. And they just looking at a few of the statements. They look at what are the credit strengths of the reinvestment zone, a growing tax base and favorable location between Austin and Waco, ongoing development within the tax reinvestment zone, credit challenges, which has been pretty much the life of the zone, has been high taxpayer concentration and a small ratio of increment values to total assessed valuation, and then weakened debt service coverage by the issue we were proposing. And it wasn't taking into account all the future increment that was being forecasted. And the rating outlook, it was stable. Outlook reflects their expectation that additional expected growth would occur. And looking, there are a lot of focus because of the concentration of the tax base. 74.42% of the revenue is the 10 taxpayers make up 74.42% of the revenue. And the number one taxpayer within the reinvestment zone is Panda Temple Power 2, or what we call Panda 2, that makes up 28%, and then Panda 1, 24%. And we all know, as there's some other developments coming online that will make that less concentrated by Panda, but we're not quite there. And right before, or just going over the bond ratings, the city's tax exempt debt or debt is rated a AA2, which is a very strong credit rating. And we were very pleased with the zone the last rating to step up to the Baa2, which is one above the investment grade rating. On Monday, May 16th, I had a due diligence call scheduled at 1:00. That's where we get all the underwriters together and comply with the SEC rules about due diligence before a bond issue. And right before that call, well, I'll back up. In that due diligence, it's a big, long list of questions, but they really focus in on Panda because of the concentration in the tax base. A lot of questions they ask about Panda. And right before that call, maybe 45 minutes, I received this from the Water Business Office. So I had to stop, assess things, met with Brian and Kathy and leadership. And so again, we were about to go to market next week. You know, we're consider the delegation on May 19th. Also on the May 19th council, we had scheduled the notice of intent to issue COs for other city projects. So we worked closely with our bond council and FA, Dan Wegmiller, Carol Colombo, and looked at what our project needs were and the timing and how critical they were. And we come up with a plan to follow this calendar and place some of the projects on the CO list. And with this, council approved the resolution of the intent to issue, and then the actual sale of the COs will be on Thursday, July 7th, with a closing on July 28th. And based on project readiness, David Patrick, we have awarded 2 of the projects that's on the list with an intent to reimburse, but this does not delay any of the projects. So what did we do? Our original TERS issue, we had project funds of $80 million, a reserve for debt service of 5.7. When we had to pivot and take another directions, we added $55 million of projects to the COs, and then continued with the revenue issue, TERS revenue issue, but we have $35 million worth of projects. And note, with the COs, we don't have to fund a reserve fund, and then the reserve fund is less on the TERS issue of close to 3.3 million. So 85 million original issue. The new issue is 93 million. What are the changes? Based on conversations with several of project and finance committee members, Soon there'll be an item come to the reinvestment zone board wanting to add additional money for the FBO project, and that's 2.3 million. Added some additional funding for the Pepper Creek wastewater of $1 million. We bumped up contingency to, I think before I'd got a lot of questions on where did I come up with the contingency number. It's authorized to go up to 10 million, whether we issue that or not. We'll see as we get closer to that point. We were able to reduce our reserve for debt service by 2.4 million, and based on project readiness of Avenue C, we took out the Wall Street project. So the net change was an additional $8 million. Clear on that? So again, we had planned to go forward with the 45.7 million of other city projects, and we added the reinvestment zone. We're needing 55 million in project funds, but just to be safe, we had a not to exceed of 56 million. In the project list of the 55 million, I see there. I won't go through all of them, but a lot of the projects to water and wastewater and construction improvements. Then also, as we plan to have the ordinance authorizing the issuance of tax increment revenue bonds, which is just a pledge of increment revenues, continued with that. And that amount, and this is a slide where we show the differences. The project funds needed are a little over 38.2 million. Went ahead just to be safe to have the not to exceed amount of 40 million. Source of the payback is RZ revenues. Term in years is 25 years. And the maximum maturity takes you to that 25 years. Type of sale left flexibility there. And then that delegation term is good until May 19th of 2023. Again, what this does is sets up designating the director of finance or the city manager to execute the pricing to sell the bonds. And just to note, the offering document, what we call the POS, will need some revisions, but it's all ready to go. We'll need to upgrade our rating, but I think it also gives us time to, we told the story and told it well with Panda 1. We got to see how Panda 2 smooths out, and then we'll be ready to go back to the market with our revenue bonds. Here are the projects for that. The outer loop, based on project readiness, it would be the end of the calendar year or beginning of next calendar year before it's ready for bidding. And then we also have the water line, North Industrial Park, wastewater extension line. And then plugged a pretty significant contingency. It just depends on, as we get closer, do we need that or not? And then with this issue, we do have to fund a reserve fund of close to 3.3 million. So what's the timeline here? We did get the bond rating on May 6th. We'll need to have that updated. Council approved the delegation ordinance last Thursday. And then those 3 events the date is to be determined, but we're ready to go when we need to go based on project readiness and just waiting through with Panda 2.
So Tracy, help me understand. I have a question. Go back one. That 35 million right there, that is what is quote unquote being delayed. Is that correct?
It's delayed compared to the original timeline, but based
It still
on
aligns with the project timeline.
David Patrick and Richard. As far as the outer loop being ready to bid, it's my understanding you still got to get a permit from BNSF.
Correct.
And best case,
We're still looking at December.
Best
December,
case.
January for, yeah.
So,
Completely dependent on BN. We've submitted the first of 3 submittals, and we've given them a 4-week review time for each one, which puts us in December for that.
And the hope is that Panda 2, the issues with Panda 2 will either be resolved or we'll at least have a better idea of where they're going.
right.
Right. And then at some time, this 35 million may be in true TERS bonds.
I think Kathy's gonna go into a lot more detail and related to Panda 2 later.
Okay.
But
am I correct that this 35 million, when issued, hopefully will be TERS?
that's what, that's what the delegation authority authorized. And when the projects are ready to go, we have things in order to go to market.
Tracy, you said best case scenario. What's worst case scenario?
With the outer loop.
No, you said with the 35 minute, I believe, maybe. I
Oh,
misunderstood.
best case scenario, the reason we chose, we knew those other projects were critical, were ready to go soon.
Right.
So we looked at these projects where they, as far as the outer loop, we knew it could be deferred to a later date. We didn't need the money to award a contract now. It was going to be late in the calendar year or the first part of next year.
So that was, you meant best case scenario.
Best case scenario would be December or January when it's ready to go.
And what's worst case scenario?
That's a really good question. So the only people that say they have were right away power than TxDOT is the railroads.
Okay,
And
so
so we're on time, we're on schedule with them. We're waiting for comments back based on our submittal we gave them in April. And we're expecting 4-week review times on each one, which put us actually, and we built in more than that in our schedule. But I send them an email every week asking, do you have it? Do you have any questions? Pinging them. But we're a little bit at the mercy of the railroad.
sure. So worst case scenario is based on railroads.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Tracy, with this shift around, do you think that by lowering it to 35 million on the revenue bonds, will it help the credit rating, keep it the same, or is that just up in the air?
It helps too with the credit rating because when they're looking at the credit, they'll take out the 55 million as
Coverage ratio is
Yeah.
better, everything.
well, the 55 million is covered by a tax pledge
Yeah.
too. They do two different calculations, but again, lowering that will help. Because we even run some real stress scenarios, revenues, and this is still, it's in there well.
And the 55 million is COs, which we weren't planning for, but we'll pick it up and go with it. Does that have any impact on the city of Temple's credit rating?
No, because it's looked at as self-supporting. And also we'll label the bonds when they'll be issued separate from the cities. And they will have reinvestment zone labeled, or in the pledge, it has the tax plus the pledge of the TERS revenues too.
Okay.
When you say help the rating, you mean help keep it the same as we've got? Or
Yeah, we keep help from a downgrade.
keep from downgrading?
Right. In a few years, we'll be ready. We can move up as when that concentration gets less.
Right.
I won't say
More-
diluted.
More dilute, yeah.
So going back to the bond ratings, and this is, I'm maybe asking you a question you don't know the answers to. What would be the difference in the interest rate if they were at the BAA ones versus the other?
The BAA3, let me go back because I asked that question because when we were going through the bond rating, they were really, again, looking hard at the concentration. And, they said it could be a BAA3 versus a BAA2. And working with Dan Wegmiller, he said as far as the issuance, there wouldn't be that much impact between the BAA and BAA3.
I guess what, no, I guess.
But there
my
is
que-
a big one between the BAA2 and the AA2.
Yeah, and that's my question. Do you know what that number is?
I might have, I can get you an answer in about 30 minutes.
Well, this isn't obviously what we wanted, but ultimately it could, could produce some interest savings for the zone,
Yes,
right?
it does. Doesn't have to fund a reserve fund, and the interest cost is less.
Ties up less money and ultimately maybe cheaper. I guess that's the silver lining, right? Maybe.
Brian, you might know you know the difference?
I was looking at that. It's probably gonna be maybe 15 to 45 basis points.
I thought it might be more than that, but
Historically, that's what it was. I just
Okay.
looked at it. So.
Are we able to ask questions?
Sure. This is a joint meeting, you bet.
What would it do from interest rate, obviously expected to increase on the prime rate, or the Fed funds rate, have to
Right.
for the next, each month? What will that do to this?
you
It's a
will
15 to 45 basis points now differential.
pay more. I mean, if rates go up, the rates will go up on that too. But
Are you asking if the spread will become larger?
No, if we issue
I'm
today-
saying that if you wouldn't issue it all now, or is it going to be same cost, even though it's a lower graded?
it will. I'm predicting if rates go like they say they're going to go, it will cost more, but you're paying interest on it less. But that you don't need it too. But then Dan, or just a rule of thumb.
It's only a few months versus the
Yeah,
term.
you look at when you need the don't try to time the market issue when you need the funds too, with that theory.
And Tracy, would it be accurate to say that while we feel comfortable, obviously, in asking council to give us the delegation authority, that knowing what is the uncertainty with Panda 2, neither you or me would feel comfortable moving forward right now, but we wanted to have that in place so when we do, we feel like we will have that step done so we can accelerate the process.
Yes, correct. And I wouldn't have felt comfortable even if the rating wouldn't have changed it going with knowing what's going on with it, making that recommendation. Just a note with the rating, if our rating was below a BAA3, you'd have to come back for you have to have investment grade rating in order to use the delegation authority. So if it's below investment grade rating, we'd have to come back for authorization to do that.
Okay. Before we get off of the financing and the projects, anybody else have any questions?
So is there any idea of when Panda might have any information as far as what their status will be?
We've got some, I don't know if we're waiting we want to talk about it now or later.
I think later.
So we've got a good bit of information.
Okay.
I think we need to congratulate Stacy and her team for their quick reaction to this and coming with this solution. Because it could have been a real train wreck. Y'all did a good job coming with this plan.
Yeah, with a 45-minute notice,
I was
you were probably swooping around your ceiling.
in a panic mode for a minute.
We've never seen that. That would be worth seeing. So I think
It's never fun when you walk in the building and they say, come in here and sit down, we need to talk about something. That was kind of the message we got the other day, so. Yeah, thanks for pulling that together, Zone.
When Tracy called me, she did say, are you sitting down?
Uh-oh.
Okay.
I guess I better. Projects, you guys have any thoughts, concerns, statements, questions? All's good?
Thank you.
You don't have to go into detail on Panda. Are you able to tell us when you think from what you know today, when you'll have clarity and you'll feel comfortable moving forward?
And after the 1st of June, it should be resolved so that we know for sure what's going to happen. And actually, just so no one's expecting a super in-depth discussion, I can tell you what we know as of today, but we're kind of in a holding pattern.
Okay.
So I can kind of tell you where we are and what we can expect in the immediate future, but it's not, you don't want to get your hopes up. It's not super in-depth. It is what we know.
From the executive session.
So is that, I'm sorry, I was sidetracked. Are you gonna go and move forward with kind of giving everybody the, I guess the skeleton of what you know now, or?
I would just prefer that we just have that discussion in closed session.
Okay, okay,
So that way we can have the full discussion and not have to worry about starting something that we can't complete.
okay. Sounds good. So if there's nothing else, y'all ready to move on to item 2? All right, item 2 is to receive a presentation regarding the Beyond the Bend master plan.
Maybe I should have, sorry. We received some information from a developer that is developing adjacent to Beyond the River. So Beyond the River, Bend of the River. And so we have been working with KPA and Covey to come up with a master plan for that acreage because it is so close to that area. And so today they're going to be presenting the master plan.
All right. So this site sits right adjacent to Bend of the River, right on 35, and then to the northeast of Bend of the River. It has quite a bit of frontage along the Leon River. It's prime for development, and we're really wanting to marry up the plan with what's happening in the river, thinking about that parkland, the open space, great access to the river, and then its prime access along 35. So we did have a few goals and objectives really for the developer and what they're going to be doing with the plan. We really want to see this pushed through as an optimal development for the city as it continues to grow. The first one is to complement Bend the River and the parkland that is offering, really expand that into the development, utilize the parkland to allow for some more compact types of developments, thinking about that, the ability to be able to really pack things in and have maybe less single family type lots, but you can have a little more open space with parkland that's provided within the river. Plan for additional points of ingress and egress along 35. We think that will marry up well with both Bend of the River and this planned area. Goal number 2 was to create a unique neighborhood that affords that live, work, play type mantra. So we're thinking about the play in terms of the open space afforded by the river and the parkland to the south, thinking about the ability to put some offices, areas of work, really setting a stage for that live work dynamic. We think getting some workforce in this southern portion of Temple will be great for the city. And then just allow for some of that really walkable type of development that we want to see. The last goal is to protect some of these natural areas of the plan area, thinking about that riparian edge along the river, utilizing that as a trailway. And then there are some portions of this plan area that are prone to flooding. So how do we protect those, integrate into them, expand on those to make them open space and amenities, and to protect the development as well. So we did do our due diligence, looking at some existing constraints and land uses, zoning, thoroughfare plans. So we did look at the flood zones. You can see, they're along the river, but not too intrusive. And then that gives us our opportunities and constraints for the plan. You can see major points of connection to Bend of the River, how that pulls through the site. We think this is a prime opportunity to connect to that major thoroughfare plan with the outer loop coming along, giving some better connections off of 35 and more southern temple connections into this area. This area is kind of isolated by the river and by 35. So this would afford another great opportunity of access into this location. And then, of course, the awesome frontage we have along 35, really affording that to some of that commercial type of land use. And then we are constrained by some electrical easements, obviously cut through the site that kind of bisects our site in a lot of ways. And then really just looking at development along the river and how we can integrate into that better. We do have some constraints with some deed restrictions along the 35 frontage, meaning that there can be no residential on that area next to 35.
So with that, and those initial backgrounds, we went ahead and looked at the site. We identified the front two parcels to really engage with that corridor type commercial. And you can start to see how the color pattern of that yellow, red, green is kind of the three different live, play, work, shop kind of mantra. The other thing, we knew that we were going to have to navigate the site, and at the center of this development, we were hoping to put something that kind of made it a unique neighborhood, or that completeness of the neighborhood. So we liked using the interface between the work and the shopping and the living and a little bit of that open space to go ahead and put that gathering, what we're calling a neighborhood gathering place. But all of this knowing that we have a northeastern connection as well as a southern connection to more opportunities. And so that's kind of what that shows. And then of that, we wanted to go ahead and look at what we think is going to make up these different districts. So starting with our residential, when we looked at that, we talked about how much open space is, one, going to be part of this site, but also the adjacent Bend of the River site. And so we're allowing for it, maybe, hey, if we have that much open space, this is a great place to put multifamily. Instead of waiting for other people to come in and ask to put it in random spots, we're saying, hey, put it here where people can have that good access to open space that supports that long-term value of that type of housing unit. As well as, how do we create some more opportunities for home ownership, even within that more compact area? So we were thinking about townhouses, some more compact but smaller lot, single family maybe, or even just kind of smaller apartments that may not be something that's always seen throughout neighborhoods, but they have that 4 or 5 unit, but they kind of have that more intimate neighborhood setting. Our commercial, we kind of have a range of commercial, starting with the stuff that we have around the neighborhood centers, a lot more human scale, walkable streets, stuff like that. And then when we get a little bit closer to the freeway, we're thinking, hey, we should have an opportunity for maybe grocery store as well as that office that we're talking about. And then just to kind of say, hey, you can come home, you can take that either quick car ride, go get your shopping, get back, maybe even walk to the grocery store. And for those people who are maybe working in this area, it's like that dining, that retail, that opportunity is real close by. And again, you can pick up some stuff over work or over lunch or even go grab a bite to eat without having to go too far. And then lastly, our open space. When we look at our open space, it's a series of open spaces. One, starting with that trail, that linear corridor of that riparian zone. Another is looking at that tighter, more localized stuff, parklets. And then we're introducing a concept, and we'll get to it a little bit, called a linear park. We think that instead of having all these multifamily units with their own, each little small compact section of park, if you put them all together, maybe around a little bit of a linear park space, you can get more activation, but as well as you can utilize that acreage a little bit more efficiently. So when it comes down to it, this is kind of our initial thought of like a land use plan, where we show that little roundabout around there, that red, darker red, that be our kind of our more neighborhood commercial scale. 6 would be more of that audio oriented. That's where you get the grocery store. maybe some out parcel restaurant. And then 5, we're kind of wrapping that neighborhood commercial with our office space. 1, this was specifically asked for by the developer. They like that location for some sort of townhouse type of living. And so we did that, seeing how some of it can interface with that outer strip of open space, that creek corridor, as well as the river corridor in some spots. And then 2 and 3 is kind of a staggered approach to that more compact multifamily, where you maybe start with something a little more intimate, you stair step up. And then you can kind of see how that 3rd one, that darker brown, kind of interacts with that linear park. So again, having a central green for all that apartment, so they have some place for day to day, go stretch the legs kind of stuff that interacts with the trail corridor along the river.
So you can really see from 35, we have our more commercial type aspects, our offices. You can kind of consolidate some of that ingress, egress of those types of uses along 35 without having to push through any kind of multifamily or residential. We're keeping our multifamily residential close to the river, close to the end of the river park, the linear park. And then we're really putting some more of that flexible type townhomes type use along this peninsula right here. And then of course, marrying it all up with a consolidated central hub of activity.
And so when we start to talk about those different distinct uses, we go from that like townhouse, which is that first residential type ownership unit, we're hoping, and kind of diversify that. Then to our neighborhood flex, again, it's a little bit smaller type of multifamily. Maybe there's some opportunities for some condo association type of development there. And then lastly, of the residential, we have our active multifamily. And part of that is really trying to kind of push the limits and encourage those buildings to front the street more so that the parking occurs behind it. So when you're within this space, you're not seeing all that parking. You're seeing, that kind of edge that allows you to promote that walkable characteristic of a neighborhood. And that's kind of what we're hoping to get out of that. And then our neighborhood center, again, street trees, outdoor dining opportunities, gathering spaces within it, all in that pedestrian scale, really tying that together. And then that retail, getting that kind of hub, that type of commercial that we'd like to have there, some sort of large big box grocery store, we think, again, kind of helps with that complete neighborhood concept. And our retail office flex, yes, maybe there is a little bit of retail, but hopefully more of like a workforce type of environment where we can get that daytime user. And then lastly, open space, specifically kind of a request from the developer. If you go back 2 slides, that chunk that's labeled open space in the north right, it is kind of inaccessible to begin with anyways. So if you're to think about it to be developed, it's that much harder to get roads. It's that much harder to get utilities there. So going ahead and starting to identify it right now is something that may be preserved as just generic open space, saves everybody a little bit in the long run as far as its ability to be maintained. We've identified some typical development standards in here. We get that smaller lot, single family type, and then you get to that neighborhood flex. Maybe it looks like a bigger lot. So 100 feet width in some instances by maybe a depth of 100, supported by an alley. But when you look at it, it almost is like a mansion type house with multiple units in it. And it's a different type of housing complex that's probably more familiar with, 30s, 40s, 50s. And so it's kind of trying to reinvigorate that. Our active multifamily, again, real short setbacks, getting up to 4 stories. If they wanted to put in a garage behind it, you could do 5 stories. But that's what's it's going to take in order to get to 5 stories. Otherwise, you're not going to hit your target units per acre, and it wouldn't be worth it. But we want to give it to the option if they did. We heard that the market's probably not there in this area right for that. But if we can move the building a little bit closer, we can get more build out on that area and get those higher units that can support some of that neighborhood commercial. Also, it's in a great location adjacent to the river and the open space in the parks. As part of that, we know that there's going to be some flexibility, so we want to make sure we're thinking about that flexibility within the initial planning process, identifying things like compatibility standards, where if you start to take something that's more residential in nature and put it next to something that's active, has a lot more daily use, like a retail store, something like that. You can have that little bit of a buffer between the two, sometimes with fencing as screening, but definitely landscaping to kind of help soften that edge. And then also the concept of a proximity slope. So if we're able to get those 5-story multifamily type units, then it would kind of stair step down to some more adjacent residential as opposed to going from 5 to maybe those townhouses. We want to make sure we have some element of privacy. But ultimately, a lot of this frames around a couple of different concepts. One is that human scale design. We're starting to see this all over Temple, where developers are coming in and they're making walkable destinations as part of all their development. So people are getting extended use from the existing sidewalk and trail infrastructure that we're putting in. And so we want to make sure we do that as well. And a lot of that starts with engaging the front yard, the front of the house, making sure that we're not overloading the street with cars and driveways, but more, hey, that's our first interface with structures and architecture and porches. And that's really the key, is when we start to make the interface between the building and the street about the architecture, it really makes it a more pleasant walk than maybe dodging some of these cars that are parked halfway in the park, or, in the sidewalk. We've all seen it. And then lastly, in order to support a lot of this, we are talking about that alleys and garages. When you have that single family, you get that tighter lot in the townhouse, you really need that back half access. And we understand that sometimes maybe that's more expensive to do all that. So there's some alternatives. How do we think about that? Well, maybe if one side is engaging that open space, you look at allowing about half the block to maybe have garage frontage and the other half be, face fronting. And then also kind of use maybe a carports on the back in some instances if they're next to an alley, just something to get covered. The climate here is more hail concern than it is frost most of the time. So if you can get some coverage on those buildings, that kind of helps. And then as a whole, we looked at the initial developable land and we started to say, hey, if we built out at this level of intensity, this is our anticipated use and square footage and units. And as a whole, we're targeting about 1,500 units for this area, and about anywhere from 644,000 square feet of leasable area to a high of 1.4. In order to hit those number highs, you're probably starting to indicate some garage parking or some things along those lines.
So here we have a perspective of that neighborhood center. This is the heart of the development, that area where it's walkable. It's along the main thoroughfare through the development. People come, stop as they're going home or as they're leaving, stop, get a coffee, come here in the afternoon with their family, get done with work. They ride their bike along a shared use path to the town center. It's that economic and social activity node, as well as tying in some of those environmental concerns such as floodplain, detention, retention, and being able to really start getting that human interface that Josh was talking about along those street frontages. This is a plan view of what that would look like. You can see the large amenity water feature area coming off that spur of Pepper Creek, really allowing that to become the jumping off point for this open space and amenitized neighborhood center, really pushing those buildings to the edge of the streets, still creating a walkable, usable streetscape. And we think some parallel parking all around this neighborhood square really hard help slow down traffic, allow people to feel like they're buffered from the actual traffic on the street, and allow for some of that seating and dining that everyone loves to see and to utilize. And we do think there's some inward focused development to this as well. Some of that activity area for some sort of large green with some sort of water feature connected with that as well. As you can see, all the development that surrounds us as well. We have townhomes and those flexible multifamily type units that are able to interface with this, and you can start seeing how they all interact and react and really harmonize this one central point.
A lot of this starts with streets. We understand that in order to make this happen, you start to provide that guidance for how you get around the site. Starting with our community collector, the current major thoroughfare plan does not identify a community collector in this area, but if you're to add this much residential plus all the development going on in the future, or just even general access to the future then to the previous site, you're going to need more than just the frontage road to start to convey people to and from the area. And so we're really highlighting the need for that community collector to tie back to the south as well as to the north and eventually to the future outer loop to get you that second point of ingress into the site. And then we go down from there to our neighborhood collectors. There's currently 2 that kind of help to feed into the southwestern side of the plain area where a lot of the residential is. Our linear Park Street is kind of an extension of that neighborhood collector. It's intended to really interact with the park, provide a lot of on-street parking, help solve some of that multifamily guest parking, second or third car mantra. When you start to get into some of those 2-bedroom houses, we typically associate 2 cars for a 2-bedroom multifamily. But when you get that 1-bedroom, sometimes it is 2 cars. And so you need to kind of start to account, how do we do this guest parking, second cars, and that on-street parking has to be accommodated somewhere. And we got to get the groundwork for it with this kind of street plan. And then finally, our locals and our other types of streets, really talking about that end of trip. How do we park? How do we interact with these areas? And so we now have just a couple of cross sections that I'll go over as quickly as possible. Our entry, it's a 2 lanes in, 2 lanes out kind of thing. The point is to move cars in and out of the site as quickly and as comfortably as possible. We want to make sure we're buffering with good landscaping, the pedestrian environment as a whole. You've seen some of the better stuff. You don't have a ton of interaction. You just got good, hey, get where you need to go. It looks nice. Welcome to the development. That's kind of the point of that one. Our community collector that's not part of the entry, it's a median street with 1-way travel in each direction, but on-street parking. We really want to slow cars down in this area. It is kind of end of trip, more or less, this plan area. It's not once you get on the bend or the future bend of the river, that's where you're going. So there's no need to necessarily, have it be a quick road getting people in and out. Plus, we're hoping for a ton of pedestrian activity. Again, that's why we're pulling buildings closer to the street, stuff like that. So we want cars slower, the space to accommodate them. We're proposing a side path on the south side of the road that helps really tie in some multimodal opportunity for this key corridor. Again, we start to see that redundant approach of redundant but important of on-street parking, really and then landscaping, buffering that edge with the development. And we see that both on our neighborhood collector and our local streets. And if we go to the last 2, we have alleys, and we want to provide some direction with that. We have some concern. We like the concept of, for your alleys, the least amount of paving possible. Make sure you got a good width, but you don't have to pave it all. So maybe 15 feet would be an appropriate width for the alley. For the paving. But if it is a fire lane, sometimes we start to see you do need to pave that kind of residential minimum standard of 20 feet that we've seen in some other places. But that's if it's going to hit that fire access emergency respondents requirement. And then we have the other one. We know there's some instances where there might be the need for what would effectively be like a local road, but you're right adjacent to the riparian zone. As such, we said, hey, maybe we can be a little bit more flexible, narrow the right of way, and really think about just the one side, because you already have a side path on the other side. So it's just basically kind of a half street concept. In our connector drive, we identified these as just kind of guidance to the commercial development in this area. It's basically a drive aisle with some expanded considerations for pedestrian and landscaping. And we did so because we wanted to encourage that walkable environment within that commercial office development. In order to do that, you need to break up these bigger blocks with some of those access points. And we said, hey, you don't need a full 50-foot right of way, 54-foot right of way. You just need something that get you that little bit of landscape buffer, your sidewalk, and then you can have your 24-foot drive aisle. And here, the last part, we don't need to beat a dead horse, but in order to really get that walkable space, you have to think about blocks. The bigger the block, the less walkable it is. But there's still that minimum return thing. You still need to be practical. And so we've provided some direction for how do we think about blocks when we're doing the subdivision process. And then how do we think about, okay, well, we don't always have to meet these block requirements with streets. Sometimes things like greenways, which are, 34-foot strips of open space with a nice walk down the middle, provides that same role as a street from the pedestrian perspective. So it allows you to maybe double what would be a regular block length because you're removing the street and putting in this nice pedestrian connection.
So we think about trails and open space. A lot of times you think about side paths and such, but we really want to pull people from their developments into some of this open space as well. So we are thinking about the overall shared use path along that main collector, but how do we pull people from those points into that open space in the overall trailway? So number one, that's the most important thing for this plan, connection to Bend of the River, is that river trail. And we see that coming all the way up to that office. It ties along the neighborhood center as well, and then down into Bend of the River. And you can see all of our other greenways and linear parks all funneled down to that trail. We think there's some great opportunity for the homes fronting that trail in the number 7 area as well. But these are the breakdown delineation of the different open space and trail type elements. So you can see here we have a couple different sections of those trails. That park trail, a 20-foot minimum right of way for that area. So that may be the area that's maintained. You may have mow strip on both sides of the trail, maybe even plant a tree on the development side of that trail to give some of that shade. We know we're going to have a lot of shade along the river, but the opportunity for some shade on the other side as well. But we're looking at a 10-foot minimum, 12-foot max. We love it 12-foot wide trail for this. We have people biking. Maybe people are able to commute to work on this. The office is up in the northern part of the plan. Our side path along the main collector, we are minimizing that width from what we normally would do as a 10-foot, because not too far away, we have this large shared use park trail. We can minimize this to just an 8-foot wide paving area. And again, we do want that building interface to feel like it's coming and connecting with that as much as possible. Our typical sidewalks along streets and in greenways, and then our greenway itself, these are just wide strips, basically breaking up that block, as Josh was mentioning, thinking about the walkability of all of this development is key. We can do greenways in 2 different ways, sidewalks on both sides of that greenway, or a sidewalk down the middle with connectors to that from the developments. So we have a couple different types of open space. Our linear park, you can see on the right, parklets, those are smaller in scale, more dispersed throughout the plan area. The detention amenity, we saw that in our neighborhood center area, and then natural areas, that's what happens along the river, those riparian areas, and all the undeveloped land to the north. So our linear park, this is again, that area that allows people to have that connection from their front yards down to the river trail, allows for on-street parking for guests. So we have about a 300-foot long park, 100-foot wide, dual use in 2 different zones. We have an active side and a passive side. We do have that clear delineation of the trail that cuts to the left of that park plan. And we also have some elements of retention and rain garden type elements in here as well. We know everything is sloping down to the river in this area. And how can we utilize that to go ahead and service some of that storm management?
Before we switch from that page, one of the other concepts is not just this space specifically, but a lot of the open space within the general plan area would potentially have the city set the guidance and hopefully encourage the development community to actually take care of this. The reason why is because a lot of the stuff is a little bit higher performing because of that increased residential number and unit count and population. We think it's probably best to have some sort of organization that not only looks after the maintenance of the multifamily facilities and the neighborhood center and the common spaces in there, but more or less a lot of the public area within this development would be maintained to a similar higher standard by need, more or less, because of the higher population count. You're gonna have more users, you're gonna have more stress on the surfaces. And, you know, that mantra looks a little bit better with that kind of organized, that HOA business association starting to take the lead on the maintenance and responsibility.
One other note to take on this park was when we first looked at this with developers and the city, they were a little shocked by its intensity, but we assured them that, hey, if we use this intensity and all this space here as your unified open space, you don't have to disperse as much throughout the rest of your development. You can maximize some of that square footage, bring your buildings closer to the street, minimize some of that open space around other portions of the buildings, and utilize and consolidate all of it right here.
You mean the developers were shocked by the intensity of the linear park and the open space?
This
But potential,
park, yes,
Yeah, and then we also did tell them what the overall acreage would be required for the number of units they had and how there is a give and take with that concept. And they're like, oh, well, I guess you're right. You know, if we have this many units, we're going to have this much open space. It'd be better to get a smaller, better maintained open space than fragmented and piecemeal and kind of disrupting the plant area.
And this may help as well in terms of their amenities offerings to their proposed tenants as well. This is a great marketing element for all of that development as well.
that's the antithesis of the domain. The domain is missing park
Yes.
space and open space. And I've heard numerous people say, oh, I'd love to live there, but.
Mhm. And you look at the little small parklets they have, they're overrun with
Yeah,
people.
totally.
As part of this, we know that, hey, if we want this to be a complete neighborhood, we started to talk about the branding for it, the imagery. And as part of that, we took in some of the direction from our developer and the site, and we pulled together this concept of beyond the bend. We've already talked about it that way, but it's really kind of based off the site. Again, there's the bend of the river, what's next to it or what's beyond it. Well, that's where that comes from. Our color theming really pulls in the need or the adjacency to the river, as well as, you know, we like this little hint of green because a lot of this was based off of the developer's desire to do some conservation practices out here. And we see that branding kind of transforming or going into the wayfinding elements that help unify and get people around the site. We know that if you are going to have this level of intensity, you need to have that pedestrian scale wayfinding. People are going to visit, hopefully via bicycle as well as vehicles. So we want to make sure we're engaging both realms. And then lastly, we just have some generic suggestions for signage. We know we want the signage to be a little bit more uniform across the development. I'm sure people know sometimes you get out there and you got the first 5 developments, they come in, they got great signage, it's all about the right scale, and that last guy comes in and blows it out and screws up everything. And so we think that it's important to kind of start that thinking about that the signage as an element of the development.
And this all ties back to that huge scale design.
Yeah.
We're really going for.
Wow.
And then kind of lastly, the next steps, you know, just as part of this, if the city decides to move forward, we need to make sure we update our long-range plans, get the regulatory support in place to allow for this development type to occur, start to identify and kind of define those parameters for the public-private partnerships, really letting the city take the lead on what they want to see as opposed to maybe having it come after the fact. And then lastly, you know, just making sure we're tying this in with the capital improvement planning process. That's kind of our presentation and plan for this one in a nutshell.
Big nutshell.
Yeah.
5 years ago, I don't think something like this even be dreamed of here, right? And now it just fits. It just seems appropriate.
Well, we took actually a lot of inspiration from the community. There's a lot of this stuff already happening, and this is kind of the next phase, just the next which is actually, if you look at Crossroads and what's going around Crossroads, you already have that in one spot. So this is just an extension of that
And for the
concept.
city to be able to plan this southern tip of the city boundary right next to development, it's really important to have a goal and a vision for all this land.
Yeah.
And it marries up great with Into the River, so.
Can we go back to the slide of the first slide for the roads? Yes, just a second. Okay, one, community collector going north.
Mhm.
Out into the ether.
Yes.
What is that? What is that? Where does that go exactly?
So it'll eventually tie into the outer loop.
Okay,
And so as part of that, the goal is like, hey, we don't always have to rely on the frontage road to get back into Temple. And again, we're not saying that's built overnight, but it's a lot easier to get the right of way early on and plan for the right of way than it is to wait.
But if you think about all of this development, anything that happens into the river, you only have this collector coming out to 35 in two different
Exactly.
spots. It's bisected from the rest of Temple.
right.
And so to get here, you'd have to come all the way
Way
into
around.
Belton and
Yes,
loop
and
around.
around. I understand
So
completely.
it's very important to have that.
So I still am having a hard time. So where, ballpark, how would that go across the world to get
If we
to
look
the
at
outer loop?
this map right here, so this is our site. The
Uh-huh,
road was coming through about right here.
okay.
And this is that new outer loop, this dashed blue line.
Where along the outer loop does it join, sort of join?
It
in?
would just come in to prior out that junction right there.
Okay. All right, I can sort of visualize it.
So Lions
Thank
Park
you.
in very far
Yes.
away.
Yeah.
No, I
Neighborhoods right
understand.
there.
And right now it is undeveloped.
Right.
The future land use plan actually up here identifies that as more residential neighborhood. So again, tying back in allows better access between the two different, the future residential up here and then the activity that's.
Right. I really like the trails, the sidewalks, and also about your parking. Because you see a cluster of cars and you don't even see the houses where they are now.
Mhm.
They need to be hidden somewhere,
Hidden, tucked, yeah.
tucked somewhere where you can actually feel like it's a neighborhood.
Especially at this smaller scale. You get a little bit bigger housing, a little bit lots, it's not as big of an issue, but when we're getting as compact as we are, definitely.
How many total residents?
Yeah, 150. 1,533 is our anticipated.
I thought I heard 1,500.
Yeah, we based the unit count based on what the developer told us in conversations, what they were anticipating, and then some future thoughts of how, he kind of saw that area and all thing. But one thing I have to say is when we were brought this and told that someone was purchasing a large amount of land and, right next to the city's own property, we thought this is a great opportunity for us to work together on a master plan. And it really has been great working with this prospective developer. It's really helped us along with the plan, but also been very encouraging that this is also what they see happening here.
The prospective developer has seen this.
Yes, we worked with them the entire way.
Oh,
Yes.
excellent.
Mhm. They may not have seen this latest version, but I think they saw the 90%. So,
Yeah.
which is pretty much, I think, what we had last time.
We just increased some of our sketches.
That's what it was, the sketches. Yep. So. Yeah, just like the sketches of the buildings, they saw the overall design concept in there. And of course, we've been working heavily with Brian Chandler, Planning and Development Services, as well as Kevin Beavers with Parks and Recreation for the trail perspective as well. This is an exciting opportunity
How many acres is that?
for the trail.
Just roughly the whole development.
The whole thing. I had it on that page.
That page.
50-something.
It's 35 and 50 and 40. So just about 130.
In the bend, beyond the bend of the river portion.
Yes, ma'am.
It's actually a little more than that. It's about 100. 35 developable acres, and then the rest is associated with
Open space.
more of the roads.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Council, anything else? Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Very interesting.
Gorgeous.
Thank you.
As if
Excited.
you do.
Uh,
Show them the money.
You'll see something happening first. Very soon.
All right, moving on to item 3 is to receive a presentation regarding the North Arts District Master Plan.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So we're, Josh and Travis are gonna hop right into this one. If you all recall, through funding through the reinvestment zone, it was identified that a North Arts District surrounded by, adjacent to the Mayborn Convention Center and Cultural Activity Center was something that was desirable in that area. So we had that done, and we also had the placemaking strategy in place. So we kind of put this on hold for now to get that accomplished. And now once we have that done, we started up again with the North Arts District. There were some changes that we've made, some modifications for what we learned from the placemaking strategy, and then also a little bit of a reduction in the overall property for the actual North Arts District. So we'll be talking about that.
So again, complete opposite of the side of the temple, as opposed to Denver. We have our northern edge, really setting the stage along 35 is this site in North Temple, again, right along in near Mayborn Convention Center and the CAC. So again, our land area did shrink by a little bit. We're down to 134.5 acres, but still it's a large, sizable piece of land. We do have a couple neighborhoods to the south. We have some light industrial to the north and then to the west. And so how do we marry up with those as best we can? So property owners, we do have quite a bit of the property is owned by Sue Mayborn and Mayborn Enterprises. We do have a little bit owned by the city and a little bit owned by a church, but nothing too bad. Current zoning, it is zoned commercial, general retail along 35 with some 2F in the backside, marrying up with the neighborhood.
And we recently, about a year ago, finished up the Bel Air neighborhood. And one of the things from that neighborhood plan is they were concerned about the type of development that was going to come north of the neighborhood and what form that would take, how it would impact their homes and their experiences. And we looked at that neighborhood, and as part of that neighborhood, we realized that that neighborhood is kind of a neighborhood that's in good shape now, but it could go either way in the next couple of years. So making sure we marry up what's around it to support that neighborhood is also a key characteristic. Otherwise, we could probably see some disinvestment in that part of town.
And the last thing to take note of is light industrial to the north. Photo inventory of the site. Again, we have the Mayborn Convention Center and the CAC. We know what those buildings look like. They're set pretty far back from 35. You can't even barely see the building. So there's not a sense of arrival. There's no sense of place there. They're pretty monotone in their design aesthetic. We do have some drainage elements. You can see number 4 we need to take note of. And it's just a pretty expansive site, not a lot of vegetation and other elements geographically on here.
Again, one of the utilities right now, and it's part of the reason there isn't development out there, is there is no utilities out there. As part of the next phase, there's going to be a lot of utilities to be installed, as well as another way to think of it is utilities to be maintained by the city moving forward. So making sure we get the type of development we want in this area that supports that long-term maintenance of those utilities. It's key. There's a big chunk there that is an easement that is for all intents and purposes, it's functioning as a drainage easement for both some of the Bel Air neighborhood as well as the CAC. And so we know that that's probably something that has to stay.
And one other thing to take note of, it's not highlighted on this plan, but there is a large transmission line bordering the northern portion of the site. It may not be an easement, but it is a large 100-foot wide transmission easement. So we do have parks and trails shown on here. You can see coming and how we connect to the south into the neighborhoods and maybe even potentially downtown. So taking note of.
Yeah, I mean, we've done 2 neighborhood plans, Bel Air and Jackson Park, and both of those leaned into this concept of a trail that would unify Bel Air and the Jackson Park neighborhood, also potentially the cemetery as a nice off-street, safe route. Trail also goes right next to the middle school there in the elementary school. So we want to make sure that, yeah, that trail exists and it serves a pretty big function. We want to tie into any future plan.
So Temple obviously sits in an amazing location in Texas. You have a lot of large cities that triangulate the Temple area. So when we're thinking about visitors, when we're thinking about events, when we're thinking about convention centers and spaces, we're thinking about where are we pulling from. So basically, we can't screw this up. There's plenty of people, and there will continue to be plenty of people and activities and things happening. We think if we're going to be developing in and around the convention center, why not let's bolster this up and start to take advantage of all the people. So we did do a few case studies looking at other types of convention and conference spaces that had some of that live work aspect to them, open space, things like that. So we looked at the Woodlands, we looked at the Pearl District down in San Antonio, thinking about how it interfaces with some of that open space, the activity happening outside, the walkability of it, the vibrancy of it. Again, Waco Convention Center is not too far to the north. Its location to the river definitely helps it. It's becoming a walkable location. It is not right now, but it's becoming one.
And these aerials kind of show the difference where the other ones were kind of more integrated into the overall site. You see the Waco Convention Center is kind of more or less surrounded by parking and maybe a couple of apartment hotel things.
Another thing that we really gleaned from these case studies was the amount of art integrations throughout the open spaces and in and around the convention space. So whenever we're thinking about the North Arts District, we're thinking about those sort of things. How do we push that through the entire development to make it more dynamic?
This diagram kind of shows, okay, we just walked through the region, we just walked through all these different spaces, and now we got to think about connectivity. How do you get to the site? And right now, the primary route is you're going to get through from I-35 frontage, that is the 3rd Street intersection, where people are coming off to get on the 3rd Street. That's really the node that people are coming on. Some people may get off on the next block up, the Dogden, I can never say it right, Dodgen Loop. That might be a good spot. There's a couple of exit ramps there. But then we're also, when we're looking at this space, we got to think of how we interface with other lots, and we know that light industrial is to the north. But we see that, okay, well, they can have 2 different distinct access points to their site. They don't necessarily need to come through. They can, but they don't necessarily need to come through this site to get access to that property.
Another thing to take note of is just that potential pedestrian connections on that south along 3rd Street from Bel Air in 2 different locations as well.
So when we sat down and we looked at this space, we said, hey, how do we break it up? How do we start thinking about a complete experience? And we're like, hey, it's North Arts District. Let's keep it in arts terms. Let's do the place where people live. We'll call it the Arts Village. Where the people want to coalesce on the day-to-day activity, we'll call that the Arts Hub. And then clearly, we have the convention space, but how do we think of it more than just a convention space? And we said, hey, you know what? We've talked about, we've heard, maybe this is a good place for a long-term presence for a theater facility. So we said, hey, let's put this as the theater and convention area. And so those are the 3 kind of key sub-districts of this plan area. And then lastly, we kind of we knew that this site had great access from the freeway. I-35 is important. We knew we had to draw people in. We understand that. We know that that's a visible location. So let's lean into the concept of corridor commercial. How do we do that? Well, we just let it happen. We'll guide it a little bit, and we'll come to that in a bit. Our primary entrances are clearly going to be along the frontage road. We've identified 2 there, and then an additional one on 3rd Street. And a lot of that kind of gets you towards that arts hub, theater, convention space, first and foremost. And then as you kind of transition into that, you have some other access back into the arts village.
We want to make sure the connections from Bel Air are not primary. We don't want this to be a big through street that everyone's racing through to get to the neighborhood. And really minimizing the ingress egress to the neighborhood, as well as making sure we do have some sort of possible connection to the north along our primary access point.
And we don't exactly know what's going to happen up there, but we do know that it could have an impact on what we're proposing in the North Arts District. So we want to make sure we're setting around some sort of buffer screenage relationship there. It doesn't have to be something substantial. It's just, hey, let's get some landscaping in there, soften it. Maybe a couple of spots, if maybe there could be some more fence, wall screenage.
And we do think that the electrical easement will act as that buffer as well.
Yeah.
That's where the electrical easement is,
Yes,
right
we have
through
that,
there.
that green strip.
So there
with the,
couldn't be, there's no road connecting to the light industrial.
So we do have this road and a potential connection.
Oh, I see
going
the
across.
connection. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And when we were thinking about that connection, we said, okay, well, light industrial, they have, their major freight routes. We wouldn't necessarily want that.
No.
But there is sometimes that interface with its user that is more kind of a traditional, like, hey, people are coming to pick something up or drop something off, or that's where the workers come in, and the workers have a side, and maybe they can connect back in to the arts hub to go get lunch. So there is some sort of relationship there in which we think that it would be appropriate. And it's something that's like through freight to light industrial. But we'll talk about something else too that might kind of frame that subject.
So here you can see all of our different uses. These are about to be reflected in some imagery and some characteristics for each one of those uses. So we'll quickly walk through each one of these. Theater and convention, you can see some of that imagery we have for that. Think of symphony, maybe they come up here. You're really starting to activate and really centralize the arts of Temple into this northern location. We're thinking educational type spaces. It's that gathering type of element as well, bringing people out here for large events. The arts hub, it's lively, it's fun, it's happening. It's kind of the center area. People are coming from living here. People are coming from other cities. People are coming from the regional area, from Temple. Lots of different types of activities happening. Again, that's that center point of the development.
We do want to start to kind of transition the space between something that's a little more flexible, allowing a live-work unit to be part of the arts hub, maybe studio space, maybe a gallery, a candy shop, something along those lines where the owner's living above. Any of those kind of things, we really like that. Maybe it's something, or it could even be something like, hey, that's a lawyer's office on the first floor and he lives above as well. We like to see that in this area. Also, we're proposing a concept of a creative incubator. We're kind of identifying 2 basic blocks for that, to where you have space that's specifically designated for anything from pottery, maybe some craft cabinetry or something along those lines. But art studios, maybe some IT, just anything in that creative realm that's quasi creative class, may sometimes push the boundaries of light industrial. But if you put them all together and you set an expectation for that, people will be a little bit more receptive.
And really, you can see the diversity of the users and possible people that are coming and living here in Temple now with just these 2 different types of uses. The corridor commercial, a typical type of retail along 35. It's tucked against the access road. It's accessible from passerbys. It's accessible as you're coming into your neighborhood or going to the arts hub.
We think
practical.
of it. Yeah, we think of it kind of like the worm on the hook kind of thing, where, hey, there's the Chipotle. Let's hit that up when we're driving through town. They hit the Chipotle and they're like, oh, what's back there? Oh, I need to go check out that. There's something over there that's going on that's more than what I'm just seeing. Let's make sure we stop on the way back up and check it out. Well, if we get this, the arts and theater going off the ground, this is a great place. Maybe just market provides a hotel experience or a hotel space to kind of support some of the activity we're hitting at. But again, lot of vehicle oriented retail on that portion.
The Arts Village, this is where we're looking at just our single family type product. These can be townhomes, these can be quads, these can be single family, even garden type homes, clustered homes. Again, this needs to be walkable, smaller in scale, thinking about the human scale design as well, pushing the parking to the back. This is fun and inspirational in a way. Maybe there's art even along some of these houses or something like that. It's just kind of that higher edge of design to the aesthetic of the architecture as well.
I've seen some of these. We got a lot of, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but this kind of normal size house on a smaller lot. You don't have a ton of yard space, but you have your regular sized house. And then it's access from the rear with an alley. A normal size house, smaller lot, and then you take advantage of what's around you. You get out and you walk around and you experience the space.
So again, all these uses that you've seen, they kind of tie into that arts district. So maybe even a little bit funky.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So again, just like we did with Beyond the Bend, we started looking at and thinking about how do we do this with blocks. We have a little bit bigger block for our commercial on the eastern side. You can see that in the darker gray, the lighter gray. We have that smaller, more walkable block. It starts out a little smaller, then it gets a little bigger as you get towards the southeastern side. That's intentional. But you see here, again, it's just starting with this concept of block size to kind of frame what your intended use. And then we also identified some concept of like primary frontage and secondary frontage. These are streets relationships, how the building needs to go ahead and start to orient to, again, our corridor commercial. We're fine with a lot of different types of use, but we're hoping maybe they kind of front the actual back a little bit more. So they're starting to engage our next street in and kind of contributing to that arts hub on that back street. Relatively pretty good connection across here. You can kind of see we have two means of access into the Arts Village. We wanted to kind of keep those a little bit farther away from the existing single family neighborhood in Bel Air. So give them a little space.
So our activity is really focused around that arts hub.
And so when we take that and we start to look at it again, we start to see how that means from a use breakdown perspective. We got our corridor commercial against the corridor, our theater in the south, our arts hub, and our arts village all kind of transition along a transect. As part of that, we're talking, the diagram on the left kind of shows your breakdown in terms of percentages and acreages. And we see that the biggest acreage in this area is what we're dedicating towards an ownership unit in the arts village. Our second biggest, again, is the theater space. A lot of that is kind of taken up by some property that's part of TxDOT that has some pipeline under it. And so it's not necessarily developable, but maybe it can contribute to the arts component. When we look at this space, we're talking about, I think it's 176 units, a single family, and 380 units of multifamily in the arts hub. So about 600 and whatever that ends up adding to housing units in this area kind of support that. We know that we hopefully would like that number a little bit higher to kind of support that commercial, but we do have some established neighborhoods to the south that we think can help draw in and support our projected commercial.
Street system, this is gridded out in our blocks as we talked about. We're really trying to consolidate the majority of our traffic on that western portion of the plan. You can see a community collector paralleling I-35, allowing all the main funneling of traffic pulling off of that collector into the arts hub and the commercial corridor. Entry streets that bring you into the site on our two primary access points into the development. Community collectors, these are urban type streets. These are where all that activity, that streetscape is happening. We have people sitting, people walking, parallel parking on number 3. And then number 4, these start to get a little more traditional in terms of the street interface. We still have parallel parking. Maybe the homes are pushed back a little bit further in this location. Traffic's a little bit slower. And then our locals, as we get closer to Bel Air, tying into existing neighborhoods.
Yeah, these streets really kind of correspond with their surrounding environment. Our entry street, again, it's supposed to get cars in and out of the site. Four lanes, 2 in each direction, good landscape buffer between that and the sidewalk. Our community collector, we're showing a cycle track on here, which is another name for a trail, but it's a designated facility for bicycles. We wanted to kind of split up the 2 different user groups along that community collector so that we had clearly a pedestrian realm and clearly a cyclist realm.
And one of the things to take note on that is its connection to 3rd Street and then its overall connection to downtown. We think that's a very prime location for that cycle track.
Our neighborhood collector, Urban One, that's basically the street we're using to serve the arts hub, mix of angled and parallel parking. The reason why is we're trying to maximize the building footprint, and as such, we need street parking to account for those visitors to the area. Our neighborhood collector too, as Travis said, it's a little more of a traditional street, but because we're talking about big lots or big houses on relatively smaller lots, we want to make sure we're using that planting strip and that sidewalk to provide some buffer between the street and the street environment and the house. So just a little bit bigger right away. Our local street, again, a little bit more traditional. We think that there's probably going to be a fair amount on street parking in this area. And as such, we want to make sure we have the room to accommodate them. Our gateway connectivity diagram just kind of shows where we anticipate a lot of our pedestrian level of engagement and street level of engagement to occur. The darker the red, the more of it, the lighter the red, the more it fades away. And it kind of puts an emphasis on the different streets and the needs for the different streets, as well as where you expect the people who are coming in on these major gateways to end up.
Open space network, we really wanted to call attention to that drainage easement. How do we utilize that as an amenity? Looking at really punctuating this idea of stormwater mitigation, taking care of that stormwater in terms of green infrastructure. Maybe we have a series of ponds or lakes that can help detain or retain water as it runs off from new urban development.
Yeah.
Then looking at those parks that are scattered throughout the development, we are looking at a large house on a small lot, so we're not thinking a lot about their own yard. So how do we start dispersing some of that parkland throughout? And the accessibility of all those park spaces is really punctuated with a clear route. You can see the side route and the multi-use trail.
And that loop that we're drawing is about a mile and 1/3. It's 1.3 miles. And so that we like that concept because, hey, if people were getting on the loop and walking around their neighborhood every day, and they got that 1 mile in, 1.25, they're getting to that 20-minute walk range, 25-minute walk range, which is key to kind of a healthy lifestyle. So,
And the majority of it is off street.
And majority of it is off street, so it's comfortable. And we don't have a ton of imagery right now. We're still kind of in progress on a little bit of this plan, but we think that this could be that cool arts trail through the neighborhood where maybe it's a personal showcase of some of the residents, and we have stands and stuff like that where they can go put their work out there.
Just a general question. What's the thinking behind larger homes here versus more condos or townhomes at the beyond the river? Is this just thought about maybe more as family style?
Well, open space, first of all.
Okay.
A ton more open space at beyond it by 400%, 500%. It's a lot more.
Okay.
This is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 acres of what could be considered park land, kind of scattered throughout, so not nearly as much open space. And then also, we didn't want to we're adjacent to a lot of single family. We wanted to make sure we did that transition well. So we start with our stuff in the southeast, being more of that bigger lot, and then it goes to more compact single family. Then
As you move north.
As you move north and into the hub, townhouse, and then your multifamily.
So we're thinking about how do we get a high quality product that, is family usable, that can start densifying and getting more rooftops as well. We should have a breakdown of what those open spaces are in terms of their activity, their programming, experience, whether that's individual or group, and then the intensity of the landscape. Is it more plaza-like? Is it more open space, or is it more natural? So we have linear parks, parklet, so those are smaller spaces, plaza, which we'll show you here in a little bit, that center green, side pass, and then multi-use trail. Again, we want to really call upon the idea of utilizing that stormwater throughout that drainage easement, thinking about the green infrastructure and making that an amenity. I think that's important. And then again, screening both from different land uses and from a neighboring and line. Yep. So this is our overall plan. So you can see our main community collector running parallel to 35. We have that commercial corridor to the northwest. I'm sorry. You can see it's almost, if you think in terms of a transect, which would be your intense areas to less intense areas, we kind of have our intensity happening on this western side, and it slowly eases into what Bel Air's type of neighborhood would be with its single family lots.
And again, that the whole purpose of that is, hey, let's be a good neighbor with this development. And so any existing single family, we're buffering with this nice green infrastructure and trail. And then we are doing that transition from this size lot, which currently exists in our first block, and then we start to get into more of that compact single family.
So if we go back to our Arts Hub area, we can see Mayburn Convention Center right here. We were told that we should expand that and utilize that still as a convention center, but some expansion of around 8,000 square feet, something around there.
The building, expand the building itself?
Yes, ma'am. And give it a facelift, connect a hotel to it, make sure we're connecting the CAC to the neighboring convention center with some sort of path and overhead structure, and really creating more of a campus type setting to that. And really, we're framing our arrival into the Mayburn Convention Center and really allowing that, it's so separated and isolated just to see it parking. We know we still need a ton of parking, but how is that arrival sequence different? How do we really pull people in? All of that is married up with a proposed new performing arts center located here, flanking this center green. So we think that's maybe where the symphony can come play. High schools can come use it from regional type areas. They come and have concerts or competitions there.
Do you not think that's going to be a direct competition with the CAC? Because that's where the symphony is
With the
now.
Mary Alice Marshall new theater,
It's new.
well, completely expanded.
Well, we do think there's opportunity for a wider variety of offerings with a PAC. That does not have to be a performing arts center, but still something that could tie in with the arts overall. We think is a great bookend for this center
It
green.
is. Well, I mean, the CAC has plenty of performing arts, music,
Okay.
but not a lot of seating.
Okay.
I think it'd be an extension of, not in competition with. So as Temple grows and the region grows, there's going to be more demand. I mean, why not here? And that's kind of the thought process. If we can create this campus and this node and have it all work together, then it is a truly unique environment that people are going to drive from I mean, maybe not all the time, but they still might get in their car from Houston, Dallas, San Antonio to come get a unique experience.
Has there been any thought in trying to pull the Civic Theater from its current location, which is looks like it's falling apart?
That's down by
The summit.
the summit. Yes,
That's what
that's one of the tenants that we were hoping to pull in. Yes. Yeah.
You've talked with people on the symphony board, on the symphony.
We
Those
had
groups in the very
in the
beginning.
very beginning.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Our very own Buford.
Yes, Buford.
Yes.
Yes, he was in it.
Yes. So we don't want people to fight. We want people
No,
to compete.
of course not.
Yeah, and we thought co-locating some of this stuff on the same campus again helps, expand that offering.
And again, that is very far down the road, whatever that offering is. It's some way of consolidating some of that arts to this area. We'll go to a perspective.
How does this relate to the Acadia
Um,
development?
it's the Acadia is downtown.
Right.
And we think there's this concept, we haven't got to all of it yet. But this more so than some of the other, like Beyond the Bend, we think actually could easily be an extension of downtown, served by something like a circulator, you've seen rubber trolleys before?
Probably the trolley.
Yep, same concept. We honestly think that it's more of, hey, we have growth in Temple, it's coming. Downtown is for weekends, weekdays. Here's another place for the other weekend and other weekday kind of concept.
Bob, did you have something?
Just gonna add, I guess this goes pre-COVID, back probably a few months prior to that. RZ was looking at the North Arts District. We actually convened quite a few of the arts community in town. And Mary Pearson was doing that, and they actually, everybody was kind of like, this would be great if it happened. And we said, well, if the arts community would come together, it sure would be. And they actually had a document that they've all executed. I think they wanted to come make a presentation to the council about their collective thought about coming together.
Including the theater.
Oh, yeah, the whole, all
So
of
that whole red.
that whole group, yeah.
Passed on.
And that they're excited about it. And then about the time it's supposed to happen when COVID hit. So I saw Mary, I guess last Friday there,
Yes,
and asked her about,
We chatted for a little
did
bit.
you? Okay. And she says, yeah, we're ready to re-engage on all that. So that's all I wanted.
Good.
We have someone on chat though, has a question. Ms. Buford.
Well, I didn't have a question and Bob just said it. So, yeah, we've all met, the symphony, the CAC and the theater, and we're all for this. Of course, everybody is interested in seeing what comes of it, but to y'all's concerns, we've talked about it and are all for it. So thank y'all for asking, but we're good.
Buford.
Didn't sound like you. It is beautiful.
They, seriously, they even memorialized it into the document, got that far.
Excellent.
I'll tell you, I think the impact on the Bel Air neighborhood could be significant too. And I spent,
Positive.
I hope, yes. I don't think it could be negative, but I hope it would have a significant positive impact. Y'all lived over there for 20 years and that's a decline. Y'all said it one way earlier, but that is a declining neighborhood. And they're struggling.
It's about to go one or two ways. And so,
Well, from my time over there, it's been declining. It's going the opposite way of what we would like for sure. And a big intentional effort, I think, would pull that neighborhood up for sure in many ways.
And I would note that the opposite, a non-intentional effort where you just let what happens happen, could be to the detriment,
Yeah.
to a significant detriment on the existing neighborhood.
I agree.
On what?
If we do not take a proactive,
Oh, right.
intentional
Yeah.
approach to guiding the development in this area, and we just kind of let whatever happens happen, then the likelihood of that being significantly detrimental to the Bel Air neighborhood is high.
Yeah, I just didn't understand the last three words, but I
And
understand.
that's the first major neighborhood you hit coming in.
Warehouse marries up with this,
How much?
2 million,
Marries up with us?
yeah, for the north. I mean, what impact do you think that has on that?
We think it has
That
a,
green belt's enough?
I didn't know it was 2 million, but that's a big impact.
What was that, John?
I was just wondering if that 2 million square foot of warehouse comes in to the north, what impact that has on us. Since it's very likely, I think. Curious what your thoughts were,
So
what that would do.
Our thoughts to that are, how do we buffer it? Utilizing that existing transmission line. Then how do we buffer it from a land use perspective as well? So we're trying to push some of these more like or not single family type uses, at least up here. So these are our incubator spaces. So they have a warehouse-esque look and feel to them. So we have loading zones in between them. These are places people are manufacturing something, building something. They're plumbers, they're metallurgists, they're tinkering, they're being creative. So we think that marries up pretty well. If we need to carry that on across the northern side to act as a buffer.
That's what I would think, your northeast.
Yeah,
I mean, having that up against that.
yeah, and that,
Your buffer needs to be in buildings, not in homes.
Yeah.
yeah. One
You're probably
solution
right.
is that with those buildings on here on half, and then our other solution was, we're actually proposing a buffer behind for screening purposes.
You'll have a good wall there.
Yeah, and then a good wall,
I mean,
good street, and then also reorient, so making sure the development looks back south at that point as opposed to accidentally forcing itself north. But those were our two thoughts, and other things is, if we need to, maybe some more green space, stormwater stuff on the northern side. So some combination of that.
We were definitely trying to maximize getting some single family lots out here, thinking about, tying into Bel Air and what this should be used as, but this has all the elements of a village, and that's really what we were thinking this as. And I think to the point of Bel Air, in as much importance of what this does to Bel Air, this will do to the Mayburn Convention Center as well. And if that's something that the city is really wanting to invest in, this type of development can really build up foundationally for that.
Does this have the equivalent of loft space for artists to rent?
So
That's kind of what we're thinking with those creative incubators.
So we do have this live work as well. So
live work.
these front that green, and they live, and then they have their little exhibition spot downstairs. It could be art, it could be jewelry, anything.
Based off of John's comment, maybe we double up with some of that art incubator and turn maybe that stuff on the north side, that band of yellow, maybe that becomes more arts lofts where it's a more substantial.
Yeah.
What's your blue?
This is those incubator type spaces.
With loading docks and.
I wouldn't
It
say
may be
maybe,
loading,
but
but
it's internal. That's
It's kind of that transition from warehouse.
Yeah.
Large warehouse, maybe to small.
yeah. Our
it's
thought,
smaller, it's one story, not too tall. It
Our
has a
thought-
great aesthetic to it in terms of building
yep,
architecture.
you screen some of that more noisy work and loading spaces between with a bigger shared parking element or shared paved surface.
I think I was looking at that opposite. The blue is buildings.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes. And then the gray in the center is kind of that.
Yeah, I was looking at just the opposite.
So as we continue, we'll have some more drawings to help visualize the plan. I know sometimes it's hard to.
I understand the CAC is always having people reach out and say, do you have rental space that I could have a small space to do? Jewelry makers, glass blowers.
That's perfect.
Now metal fabricators for art, not for pipes.
Yeah.
That,
And now they can say yes and follow us. We'll walk you over there.
Yeah.
That's kind of that
Good.
thought process.
So this entire green is kind of bordered on this northern and eastern side with that walkable exhibition art gallery type feel, we think there's ground floor retail, ground floor restaurant on the mixed use area here. And then we have our live work here. And this is the perspective of what that can look like. Say you have a large event out here, we have all the activation of the street. We think these are streets, like market type streets, that you could shut that block down and isolate an entire event out there. You have some sort of large in architecture element here, married up with an outdoor amphitheater, the live work beyond it. Parallel parking, you can see here the expansion of the Mayburn Convention Center here with the new conference space.
It seems like that'd be a great location for what Temple is missing. For that 30s and 40s set, they're all going out to Johnny's and Chef's for outdoor events where they can mill around and visit and sit on a picnic bench and visit with folks and listen to music and maybe do dancing or whatever. And they have that at the CAC. They have the music, which is incredible, but you just have to sit. And so I think they lose a lot of folks that way. So you're saying this would be
Yes, ma'am.
something similar where they could set up the stage.
Very informal. You got families out here, you got kids playing, and maybe some sort of little fountain in the middle, but it's very flexible.
And it's big enough that it actually can have some day-to-day recreation opportunities. It's a good place to go play catch, throw the ball around, stuff like that. And it was intentional to make it that big in that specific spot. Is again, it pulled people from that neighborhood back into the space to activate it.
What do you do about alcohol in that situation?
Same thing Georgetown Square does.
Exactly.
I think it's.
Where's your parking, Gary? Where are you doing, where are you? getting
So
your parking?
we are,
Where's your garage?
we probably will have to put a garage, yes, sir.
Just where do you locate it?
We're thinking a garage may have to happen inside here, maybe even in this location.
So one way to think about too, it's definitely something that can be phased where, between on-street parking, if we're trying to have an abundant amount of on-street parking, you start with maybe this building, and when you build this next building behind it, then you come through and maybe add that parking garage. We have some overflow parking here. This is intended to be parking for the convention center, but easily when stuff isn't going on, can serve this area as well. And then the corridor commercial, as of right now, can self-park. It's pretty close to that relationship of buildable area to.
We did marry up some of our past studies into this plan as well, thinking about that expansion of the Mayburn Convention Center. This is just a view of what that could look like, really getting some more architectural presence to that building, maybe even capturing some of the attention of 35 buyers.
So that's the front.
That is the front. That space would look out onto that.
To the open green. That would be this space right here.
Gotcha. Okay. But you said that would capture from I-35, so
That's really north. That's the north side stuff, right?
It's more that you would be able to see it.
It's just a visual capture. I'm sorry.
Oh, pretty.
So thinking about how this existing convention center interacts with other development in and around it, we're thinking about really that pedestrian scale design and really your arrival into the center. Right now it's just blank parking. You may not even know where to enter.
Well, and if we go back to one of the plans, we're still working. The last one, actually, it's great.
It was good.
The green. The green. This space right here is kind of like a plaza piazza type space that can be used for either drop off or it can be completely closed down. And maybe you put the Christmas tree in the middle and you put some booths on the outside. It kind of has that bazaar or festival space. But again, it is the access between the proposed performing arts, the convention center, and a hotel space all in the center. This could be a nice pedestrian plaza, or when there's no activity going on, you allow it for continued access. That's one of the nice things about the grid system and the street layout we have, is there's other ways to get around the site. So when you close that down, you're not really impacting too much.
And then just looking at some of the existing work we had done in terms of the arrival from 35, the signage for the convention and North Arts District, thinking about that branding, that monumentation, still calling attention to the neighborhood convention center, but also North Arts District. We got a little bit cut off on the left side.
That's my fault.
It's all right. And then maybe you can see that hotel in the distance.
Oh, that's what.
Really calling
Good,
attention
okay,
to that
good.
visually. So again, just that arrival sequence. And we're utilizing the same entry point that is currently there right now.
But improved off of
Yes, ma'am.
3rd Street. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I raved at Aaron about that one week. After I got raved
Street's
that
very
one
important.
weekend. Yeah,
Yeah.
3rd Street is very important.
And so that will have signage as well, we
Yes.
think, and maybe it's just, so these pillars are pulled from the architectural elements of the existing convention center, just trying to tie that in, that architectural look. And we think that could marry up with that 3rd Street entry as well.
And then part of that's kind of getting the rest of that in its next steps is kind of showing the different monumentation, where it's located, and having a map exhibit for that, kind of showing that the art characteristics we'd like to see in these spaces, and some more renderings of the overall.
We definitely, there's a lot to this plan, and there's a lot of story to be fleshed out with some more visual aid type things, and that'll be kind of our continued progress on this plan as well. Again, also looking at maybe some better buffering on the northern side.
Yeah.
Love it.
No solid location for that parking garage. You ain't got no parking for that. Or I know
No, it definitely needs a parking garage.
you're not gonna be able to add additional. That parking lot's full now. You just took that whole front parking lot away. Right?
We are hoping to expand out into this frontage area as well with large event type parking. You can add as overflow.
So a parking diagram will definitely be in this plan to
Pretty
kind
big
of,
street to cross.
yeah.
Right? I mean, in reality, you should.
We're
Yes,
You
hoping,
got a parking problem still.
We have a parking problem.
we'll figure it out. We'll put it on there.
Sorry.
We'll show the diagrams where people are going. Hopefully this is more when we need, so this would be all parking here, and it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 acres of parking, and then overflow parking over here. That's the one where we gotta make sure that we can for sure park maybe one event, but if we're having events in multiple things, we need to make sure we got everybody.
And then when I think about once you're parking all over that, the accessibility on those roads as well.
Yeah, we do have the good sidewalks and things like that.
And we have multiple access points,
Yeah.
so that
And
does.
accessibility, you want to take that, try to get some I mean, get a good front, because you're blocking, you're saying how great it's gonna look, but where you're gonna put your parking garage is blocking most everything, so you're gonna wanna integrate that into the plan.
Mhm. And we do have this page right here. We're thinking about the facade of some of those parking structures. How can we enhance those to make them feel appropriate to that human scale design and tying into the rest of the architectural aesthetic that we're trying to push through. All great points. Thank you. This is why.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Mhm. Very good. Be nice to see.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Any other questions or?
That's a lot to take in.
Mhm.
It really is. That's a lot. Council,
It's really wonderful.
anything else on this?
Close plans.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Good luck, John.
Yeah, here, on my way.
All right.
Wait,
It's a good time because at this time, we're entering into executive session.
Back today.
Currently is 4 o'clock. RD, thank you for taking your time. Appreciate it very much.
No, well, yeah, they knew.
And he did coming into this meeting.
Grandparents.
Can I have it back?
Am I in third grade? I can never remember.
And he's done.
Yes, she is.
And
All right, at this time, we'll receive a briefing from the city attorney regarding contracts originally executed by between Panda Temple Power LLC and Panda Temple Power 2 LLC. And pursuant to the government code section 551.071, the city council will meet in the fifth session to discuss and receive advice regarding a matter of attorney-client privilege. No final action will be taken. Want me to read 5 and 6 in also, just get it all? Number 5 is to receive a briefing from the city attorney regarding the provision of utility service outside the city limits. So it Texas Government Code 551.071, the council will meet in executive session to discuss and receive advice regarding a matter of attorney-client privilege. No final action will be taken. And then number 6 is to receive and discuss a briefing regarding certain economic development prospects and potential real property acquisitions or sales pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.072 and 087. Council meeting closed session to discuss or deliberate the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property. If deliberation in an open meeting would have detrimental effect on the position of a governmental body and negotiates with a third person. Discuss or deliberate commercial or financial information received from business prospect. If the governmental body seeks to have locate, stay, or expand, enter near the city of Temple, with which the governmental body is conducting economic development negotiation, or to deliberate the offer of a financial or other incentive such a business prospect. No final action will be taken. And then number 7 is to discuss the employment duties and work plan of the city manager pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.074. City council meeting executive session to discuss the employment and duties of the city manager. No final